Hello, amazing visionaries. This is Lorna Liana, and today I'm so excited to bring to you a friend of mine from a while back called Carlos Tanner, who has been doing incredible work in Peru. Now, Carlos has lived in the Amazon rainforest of Peru for over 14 years, and that is no small feat. In 2009, he helped to found the Ayahuasca Foundation, a nonprofit organization that educates Westerners about the Shipibo culture of Ayahuasca curanderismo. And in this intriguing session, Carlos will share with us his observations about the expansion of ayahuasca around the world and discuss the risks as well as the benefits. And then we're also going to dive into the rich world of Shipibo culture. So welcome to the interview. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Lorna. It's nice to see you again. Hope you're doing well.
Awesome. So I would love to hear about your journey because it's very unusual for a Westerner to live for so long in the jungle. It's not easy for even many of us to spend more than 3 months in the jungle. So how did you end up connecting with this calling and this mission? Because clearly it is very much a mission that you're on, what I see, and I think it's a beautiful one. So I'd love to hear about how it unfolded for you.
Sure. First, I don't live like in a jungle hut. I live in Iquitos, Peru, which is a town. It's very close to the jungle. It's in the jungle, but I haven't lived for 14 years in a hut. I've spent a lot of time in the jungle, though, for sure. And so in the early parts of the new millennium, 2002, 2003, I was what I think most people would consider to be a successful person living in American society. I was a managerial position, working as a production manager for a newspaper. I lived in a beautiful house. I drove a nice car. I had, all the things that you're supposed to check off your list of what it means to be successful. But I wasn't feeling satisfied with my life. I felt that there was a path for me, and that path was not the path of my career or any career perhaps. And in order to deal with the success or what I felt was the reality of the sacrifices made for success, I began to try to dull that sensation that there was something more for me to be doing with my life. And I did that by drinking and using drugs, eventually using strong opiates like heroin. And I became addicted to drugs while still maintaining this successful job. Not many people really knew that was happening in my life. And that culminated in me waking up at around 3 o'clock in the morning in my car. I had blacked out driving home from a bar, and my car was underwater. Water was pouring in through the windows. I immediately just had to figure things out as quickly as possible, jump out the window, swim to the shore of this river, and then just watch my car sink beneath the water. That was my wake-up call for sure, that I needed to make a change or else I might die. I could have died that night. Mm-hmm. And I knew there was this connection, between my drug use and my awareness that there was direction being shown to me. There was guidance, but I was having to ignore it because of the conditioning I had about a career. I can't just travel. I can't just go somewhere because spirit is guiding me to do that. I have a job. I have to go do that, and that's my career. And that's what allows me to have all these things that you're supposed to have. And so that had led me spiraling down to this moment where I was like, I don't care about my career anymore. I might die. I have to take care of my life first. And 2 weeks later, I got an email from a friend of mine who had been in Japan for 2 years, was traveling in Peru on her way back to the U.S., happened to go to Iquitos, Peru, happened to meet two guys from Russia that knew a shaman and invited her to go drink with this shaman. She knew that I was interested in ayahuasca because I had talked about it when we were friends, before she had left for Japan. Just decided that she would write to me. And because of the circumstances, I felt like this was the guidance. This was the universe speaking to me. This was the path being presented once again as a response to my intention to regain that connection. And so I said that this is what I need to do. And I flew down to Peru. I spent 5 weeks there, and I was healed in ways that I couldn't have possibly imagined. I never did heroin again. I mean, that was a big part on the surface, but really the healing was so deep down to the core of bringing up traumas that I didn't even know I had. I didn't even have any memory of these traumas, most likely because I couldn't deal with them and suppress them. So the healing went to such a deep level. And during that process, I was having profound visions about doing this work, about this being my literal path. And the curandero that I was drinking with in the third ceremony that I attended invited me to live with him and to become his student. And that was a pretty powerful invitation. He didn't invite anyone else in the ceremony to do that. Again, my ceremonies were so profound that I came to the conclusion that that is what I felt like I should do. And that's what I did. That was in 2003 in the summer. And so I went back home, took about 6 months to wrap up my whole life, basically. And then in January of 2004, I returned to Iquitos and moved in with my first teacher, whose name was Don Juan. And I lived with him and his family for the next 4 years and studied with him.
Wow, that is such an incredible story. And I just, I felt like I was there with you as you watched your car sinking. And I'm so glad that you were with us, and that must have been such a powerful wake-up call. How much time passed between the time that you had that moment of like, hey, smack upside the head, and when the invitation to connect with the shamans was presented to you?
Literally like 12 days.
Wow, that's amazing. Universe works very quickly. Great. So, so then what led to your motivation? What inspired you to start the Ayahuasca Foundation? How long did it take from between the 4 years in which you were apprenticing to then realize that there was a need for this school that you created?
Well, I'm a American, so as a student, I most likely took a different approach to learning this science of plant medicine than an indigenous person, especially an indigenous person who has no written language. I do have a written language, and I wrote notes. I took notes on the things that I learned. And I also had access to technology, which I took full advantage of. So I had a video camera that had infrared, which nowadays I think they have changed that technology. But I would, I built it so that there were no lights being created by it, and it had this flap on it, so I could flip the flap up and look and see at night. So I would film the curandero doing work in the ceremonies so I could see better what he was doing. And I would record with an audio recorder. Back then it was a mini disc recorder.
I remember those, yeah.
Yeah, that's how old are we, huh? But yeah, so I would listen to the mini disc recordings of the Icaros, and I would transcribe them, trying my best to write down what the lyrics were and eventually present them to my teacher to revise and, to correct. And I had a keyboard also, so I would using musical notation paper, write the musical notations of the melodies of the Icaros with the lyrics. So I ended up with like musical sheet music of the songs that were sung during the ceremonies, and notes and videos that allowed me to learn more quickly and to remember and to, process. And I began categorizing the material that I was learning. And eventually I realized, like, look, I've got all this material, which is great for me, but I could like share this material with other people that are in a similar place. They found this path and they're struggling most likely the way that I have to learn and to understand this stuff. And, obviously I had developed ways to interpret some of the concepts that are a bit more challenging because they do exist in a separate paradigm and a different reality than we're accustomed to. So I decided, like, I could teach like everything I learned to other people in just 6 weeks. Like in 6 weeks time, I could present with all of these technological materials the same thing that I had taken me 4 years to learn. And so I did. Like I started the course, and that was the original intention for the course, was I was going to teach as a student after 4 years to newer students the things that I had learned and kind of help them so they didn't have to make the same mistakes or to take the time that it took me to get to where I was. So to accelerate this teaching process. But my first teacher wasn't so excited about that concept. In fact, I had an idea about what a teacher is, and it's based on what Westerners have when we have teachers. We have a format for education, and you go and your teacher gives a lecture, and you go and your teacher like has a workshop, and these are things that are demonstrated. My process in the Amazon, which I imagine is probably very similar to processes in general in that culture, is that students are observers. So that's what I was doing. I was observing. I watched my teacher do all of these things, and that was incredibly beneficial. But he didn't really like to just sit down and give a lecture. And if he did, it was this rare, glorious moment for me when it would happen. It was clear that he didn't enjoy like that aspect of teaching the way that I wanted a teacher to teach. And so that was part of the reason why I moved out and began like working with other teachers in the hopes of like finding someone who felt the same way about my view and had the same passion about teaching people. And it took about 2 years to really find that teacher, which is our current teacher, Don Enrique Lopez. And the very first time I met him through a friend of mine who was his wife, although they weren't married when I first knew her. And he taught me so much that first day, just as a stranger. He just taught me so much. He just loved to teach. And so we really were on the same page when it came to our vision about educating people about this culture so that they could learn at a more accelerated rate. And then he started contributing his ideas, and it became like this collaborative effort to find ways to share this culture and this tradition with people from all over the world so that they could bring it back and use it to help people in their own communities.
So what is the purpose of your educational program? Is it like a shamanic certification program for people who want to be ayahuasca facilitators? Or is there more to that? Or do you have different types of programs for different kinds of people?
Right. We have 3 centers. So one is the school, and that's where Don Enrique works, and he's the maestro of the school. And those programs are intended for people that do feel a call to this path, to be a healer, to serve medicine, to become a curandero, essentially. And the course is we call it an initiation course. It's an introduction to the basic core principles of the shamanic tradition. And, you know, I look at it as like, if you start with a strong foundation, then yes, you need to build more and more on it, and you're forever a student. So it's not like there's a graduation point or something where you're like officially a curandero. Every maestro is a student forever. But if you have that core principle, that foundation, then what you're practicing will be practiced correctly. And that to me was really important. I think that if you try to figure things out, like I'll give an example. I played percussion, African percussion, for 12 years when I was in the US, and I never took a lesson in the beginning. I just banged on the drum and kept doing that and kept practicing, and got to a point where I was like semi-professional. People would hire me to play. I performed with a DJ. We would play at parties and events and you know, travel around New England performing, and I would make money doing that. But at a certain point I thought, I'll take some lessons. You know, I've never taken some lessons. I'll take some lessons and learn some new rhythms and, like, you know, enhance my already whatever I felt it was a good skill set. And when I went to the teacher, the very first thing he said was, well, you don't know how to hit the drum. And, you know, like I was angry, you know, I'm like, hey, I get paid to do this, you know, like, don't tell me I don't know how to hit the drum. I've been playing the drum for so many years. And it took like a real humbling for me to get to the point where I was like, you know what, I don't know how to hit the drum. Like, teach me how to hit the drum properly. And had I learned how to hit the drum properly in the beginning, then all the years that I was practicing not hitting the drum properly, I would have been employing the right foundation, the right principles. And so I would have gotten that much better. You know, I wouldn't have had to go back and relearn, or to realize that my understanding was not totally accurate and have to try to fix that. Some of that could be literal, like, brain programs. You know, I had to like detrain myself so I could retrain myself more correctly. So the idea with this course was to like start out with the proper understanding, so that when you do practice it, you're practicing it correctly. And then eventually you'll get to a point where you can practice it in, you know, and actually share it with other people.
I think this is a beautiful analogy, because in the world of ayahuasca shamanism, I think you and I are both witnessing this expansion, this global expansion of ayahuasca. And I can't even tell you, like, even since you and I last were, spoke, the number of people I meet who tell me, well, first of all, they initiate themselves. They have an experience with ayahuasca or some other powerful medicine, and then they tell me that the medicine initiated them. It was not, there was no like initiation by an elder or, spiritual, leader, or established shaman or curandero. And then through their direct apprenticeship with the plant, they are learning how to serve the ayahuasca. And every time I hear that, I think of you, actually, because I think of you in your school, and I say, hey, well, there are certain cultural protocols or, that the indigenous people have followed for specific reasons. And there might be things that you could learn, especially around dealing with the energies of the medicine, the energies of the Icaros, the, calling in the spirits. If you went to had a training program and, check out Ayahuasca Foundation. But, it's just kind of like, oh no, I've got this direct channel with the Madre. And so I'm curious to know what your thought is about that and the fact that it seems to be happening a lot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, going back to that example again, it's not like I played the drum. Like a lot of people that heard me play the drum before I ever took those lessons, which I guess you could say I was like self-initiating myself into playing this instrument, they thought it was good. You know, they enjoyed, I hope they enjoyed like listening to me play. It wasn't until I wanted to go to a higher level. It wasn't until I could see the limitations and understand that my lack of understanding, you know, that I never did have a proper teacher and wanted to go to that level, was when I then had to realize that I did not have a proper foundation. So people that are like self-initiated, you know, I do think that it's definitely different, because you're not just like playing a drum. There is the potential for people to be opened up without you understanding what to do in those times, and it can, you know, create risks for sure. But for the most part, you're probably not going to be able to get to that depth of healing. It might happen like accidentally, but because you don't have those principles, then you'll be working on what I would consider like a more superficial level of healing, which is beneficial. You know, most of the people that drink ayahuasca receive benefit, and that's a good thing. But by learning the traditions, by learning that principle foundation, you can then intensify that, you know, focus it, deepen it, and make the healing that is achieved by the people attending those ceremonies much more profound. Now, of course, when you do go into the levels of profound healing, that also increases those risks, because if you have someone that has severe trauma and you're now going to enter into the depths of that trauma to bring it to the surface so that it can be released, that's going to create a much more challenging situation than having you know, kind of like a nice, gentle, soothing healing. You know, just like a person who gives a massage might not have to worry about the same things that a surgeon has to worry about, because they're not cutting you open. They're not, you know, getting inside and having to be delicate with your organs or whatever that the work that a surgeon is doing inside, and making sure that you're sewn up properly and that it all heals properly. But the surgeon can perform healing methods and procedures that can make, you know, get really, really deep. And so that's how I would look at it. You know, people that are self-initiated, I would love for them to improve their understanding and to have proper teachings. What I cringe at a little bit is the notion that, well, the plants taught the original curanderos. You know, there had to be in this first curandero who didn't have a teacher, and so the plants taught him, and that the plants are the real teachers. And it's something I say all the time. Yes, the plants are the real teachers. The plants are the real doctors. They're the real masters for sure. But understanding how to interact with them and understanding how to collaborate with them, to work with them, how to listen to them, how to improve communication with them, those are things that are taught by a person. If you don't have a high level of communication with a plant, how is the plant going to teach you how to have a high level of communication with it without having the high level of communication? It's like, if I can't hear you, how are you going to teach me how to hear you? You know, it has to have a person who has that experience, in my opinion, a person with that experience. And that's why if you look at the lineage of curanderos, they have teachers. They have human teachers. Of course, every one of them will also say that the plants are the true teachers, but it is their human teachers that taught them how to enhance that communication, how to work better with those plant spirits, how to have a more profound student-teacher relationship with the plants, how to build those relationships with the plants. And to me, that's incredibly important.
So what are some of the risks, let's say, from a participant standpoint, if they are, sitting with a facilitator that really hasn't had the foundational, training? Because I think, a lot of people, as the awareness of ayahuasca expands globally, people, reach out to me and they ask like, hey, do you know of any ayahuasca, facilitators in, Kansas or something? And, I'm just like, I don't know. But then it made me think, I'm like, wow, there are a lot of people looking locally first, because it's probably easier before they're going to take the plunge and go to Peru. And even then finding somebody who's trustworthy and qualified is also, it's also a bit of it can be a process. So I'd love to understand what some of the potential risks are. So to encourage people, hey, do some due diligence and, ask the right questions and research, who this person is and what training they've had. Because the plant teacher is, teaching me may not really be enough for them to be able to, work with you in this way, in such a profound way. What would you say to that?
Totally. I get the same questions all the time, and it definitely seems like people are looking locally. And, my vision with this course and in general is that hopefully we can get to the point where we can all find healers locally and we can experience these in our own communities. That's a main goal for me in this project for sure. Before I go into the specifics of that question, though, I do want to talk a little bit something, because when you said like locally, it brought up something for me. And that was another like really big reason for setting up this course. And that's that there's so much attention on ayahuasca itself, and that's understandable for sure. But there's not a lot of attention on the rest of the science of plant medicine, which is a massive, massive science. And the articles are written about ayahuasca. Everyone talks about the effects of ayahuasca, the healing properties of ayahuasca. Yet, if you are actually treated for a particular condition, ayahuasca will be part of that process. And then there will be a lot of other treatments involved in that process. And one of the things that I don't see in very many of the westernized ceremonies or the ceremonies taking place outside of the Amazon is the rest of that science. A curandero in the indigenous tradition or the Shipibo tradition have an ayahuasca ceremony. They see what is going on, what the conditions are, and what plants would be best to treat it. And then the next day, they get those plants and they begin treatments, whether it be treatments with vapor baths or treatments with other plant baths, or making remedies that you need to take 3 times a day, or taking strong remedies that you just do once every couple weeks or something, or using poultices to place plants that are wrapped on you topically, or plants that go up your nose, or there's all this other pantheon of plant medicine. And ayahuasca is a central part of that, because the communication and the understanding of the diagnosis and prognosis to use those plants happens in ayahuasca ceremonies. But there's so many other plants that contribute to the overall healing power of plant medicine itself. And I don't see that happening very much at all.
Yeah, I think it's this fixation with the psychedelic aspect. It's
right.
What all the news media and the documentaries like to focus on.
Right, exactly. So if you're a Westerner or an American or European or Australian or wherever, and you're going to go to an ayahuasca ceremony, that you'll have the ceremony, and then you're going to go home. That's the classic like scenario. And maybe you'll go for a couple days and have a ceremony 2 nights over a weekend, and then you go home. And even just saying that shouldn't make a lot of sense. that kind of turns it into this magic bullet.
Yeah, I was just about to say that was the word I had in my mind. It's this idea that it is a magic bullet that will heal everything, every, psychological or even physical condition that you might have.
Right. Well, what has happened because of that focus on ayahuasca is that it's been reduced to what it can really treat. And ayahuasca it is incredibly beneficial for treating depression, anxiety, PTSD, some of these, what I would consider like the psychological aspects of it, the emotional aspects of it. For sure, ayahuasca is great for that. But if you really have deep issues, and especially physical issues, then plant medicine is going to be needed. Other plant medicine is going to be needed. And even if you have a trauma or you have something that can be treated with ayahuasca, using other plant medicines is going to incredibly amplify the effectiveness of the ayahuasca as well. And that's one of the things that in studying, in working with it, and especially with regard to like self-initiating, facilitators, what happens in an ayahuasca ceremony isn't just an interaction between ayahuasca and the people that are ingesting it. It is, when a ceremony is led by a curandero, it is an interaction between ayahuasca and all of the plants that the curandero has a relationship with. And the curandero calls in the plant spirits of all their diets, all the plants that they've dieted with. And so now you have an entire team of healers of these plant spirits all working. And the particular plant spirits that are more adept at treating the particular conditions or addressing the particular personality types or energy of each patient step up. They take the lead in those processes. Now, that's not that easy to distinguish from a participant's perspective. We're likely to say ayahuasca did this because we don't have the capacity of understanding to isolate which particular plant spirit was working at that time. And because we ingested the ayahuasca and our understanding is limited, we just attribute it to ayahuasca in general. A facilitator who's self-initiated, that's going to be a much bigger challenge for them to build those relationships. And so they're most likely not going to be able to call in this whole team of healers. There will just be an interaction between ayahuasca and the participants in those cases. And so not to degrade that, there's still benefit potential there, but it would be less than if they were to be initiated, if they were to do those diets that were opened up for them by people who already had those relationships, their teachers, their other curanderos with those experiences that introduced them to those plant spirits, that vouched for them on their behalf as their students, that basically helped to bridge these gaps in connecting them, in making strong relationships. So
are there risks? Are there dangers? Are there
right.
real dangers of working with somebody and they're actually not that experienced?
Right. I think there's always going to be risks that even if you are with a talented or experienced curandero, there's going to be a level of risk. And because you're a unique person and you're going to be opening yourself up, you're going to be amplifying your senses to become aware of sensory perceptions or feelings or visions and audible sensations that are normally not present for you. How you react to them is always going to be unpredictable. And so if you have a facilitator who doesn't have a lot of experience and a person has a sensory experience that makes them really fearful, creates high levels of anxiety, they have a physiological response to that anxiety, and they find themselves in what could be called like an emergency situation. Now, it would be the curandero's job to calm that person down, to reduce that emergency situation, to allow for that healing process to happen without the fear, the anxiety, and the strong reaction. And there's methodologies, there's procedures for that. And unfortunately, because of that lack of understanding, oftentimes it's kind of like explained away as that's what ayahuasca does. Hey, that's like the experience you had to have. And I was in a ceremony where I was kind of like a guest in a ceremony. I wasn't leading the ceremony. I was there really to like see this other person who I had heard great things about. And there was a gentleman in that ceremony who was suffering, who was what we would call crossed. Like his energy lines had been crossed, and it was creating a real state of suffering for him.
What do you mean by energy lines were crossed? How could you see this? And what are the results? What are the symptoms or repercussions?
Right. The term crossed comes from the Shipibo culture, and their idea is basically like running up our spine and out the top of our head are in a network of lines of energy, like threads of energy, and they encompass ourselves and they create a field of energy surrounding us, but they also connect to our relationships, our experiences, our friends and family, our ancestors. They can go, backwards, forwards in time even. They're what connects us to the entire universe, I guess you could say, although typically we are not like reaching out across the universe, but it is what connects us to the various components that are most personalized to us.
Like energetic cords.
Yes, exactly, right. And so if you have energetic cords reaching to your mother and to your father and to your friends and to experiences from your past, and there is trauma or an unhealthy thought program that was developed in relation to some of those relationships, and in the ceremony, the heightened awareness of this brings these lines together, except that they're not flowing smoothly. One is preventing the other from having energy flow smoothly. And so this energy basically gets balled up or shorts out, or, can be like an electrical short when the wires touch is like an analogy for that. And it can cause someone to kind of lose control or to, literally have a physiological response where they have a lot of difficulty controlling their physical self. So the effects that you would most likely see is that someone can't stop throwing up. That's their physiological response to trying to make sense of these experiences, is they throw up or they can't think straight. So they're like rocking back and forth. They can't keep a thought together. They're suffering, and that creates a reaction to that, which can go anywhere to a person thinking that they're going to die because they can't understand what's happening to them. Their heart rate might increase tremendously. Their blood pressure might increase tremendously. Sweat profusely. Real physiological responses can happen. And something needs to be done. Now, I was witnessing this, and I did not see the curandero go over to help out. Like, they weren't doing anything.
Sorry, you cut out.
The curandero.
So you did not see the curandero go and administer to him. Right.
And so I went and I said, "Hey, do you want me to help you? I can help you out." Now, the curandero was Peruvian, and I'm not. And so and I understand that. I was basically a stranger who, nobody knew who I was. So he was like, what's this white kid gonna do to help me that the real maestro, the Peruvian maestro, can't do? And so, okay, then I won't do anything. But I couldn't stand it, like watching someone suffering so much. And so I went over to the curandero and I said to the curandero, like, can I help that person? Like, can you give me permission to help that person? And so the curandero said yes, which to me, that curandero didn't know. Like, I'm being generous by even calling that person a curandero, to be totally honest, because how could they not know how to do that? And luckily that the guy suffering like saw that the curandero had allowed me permission. And then I just implemented one of the procedures that to me is like curanderismo 101.
What
like
is
it's
that?
it's obviously one of the things that you should know how to do, which is soplang and chupando, like blowing smoke, using agua florida to blow spray agua florida on a person, and also then sucking energy through agua florida into your mouth and then spitting it out. These are like very, very core level procedures, but they work. And you don't have to be like some high level maestro to be able to get them to work. They're just fantastic procedures. And so I did them and they worked. And then he wasn't suffering. And he stood up and gave me a big hug, and great, that's how it is. And then I found out though that this was my one ceremony, and it would only be the one ceremony that I would drink with that person, that curandero or that person. But he told me that the last 4 ceremonies had been the same way, except that there wasn't a person to do that, to help him. And he had stayed that way till 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, just like 6-7 hours of suffering. And his perception was that that's what he needed. That's ayahuasca was continuing to work on him because he had so much negative energy, because he had so many toxins, because he had whatever. It was ayahuasca was doing what it needed to do, and it was just up to him to deal with that suffering. And that's some stuff that I really don't like. And I don't know, there's so many ceremonies taking place, but I could see that being a great way to kind of spin someone having a really difficult experience. And you kind of see it in people's commentaries too, like about a person who had just a really tough ceremony. And it's one thing to have a tough ceremony. I've had tough ceremonies, but you go through a tough time until you need help, and then someone helps you, and that's still a tough ceremony. You don't want to have to ask somebody for help. You want to be able to process it and deal with it yourself. But if you do ask for help, the help shouldn't be, hey, deal with it. Because
I mean, yeah, it just seems so, like they're dealing with it in a, possibly highly psychedelic experience that could be terrifying. It's interesting. I mean, people go through all levels of, can go through all levels of experiences. And if somebody is having extreme fear and is screaming all night long too, I feel like that person does need to be addressed. And of course, also because there's other people in the ceremony too. So it just becomes very difficult to have a person that's not being helped if they're having a really hard time and very, and very vocal about it.
Oh, definitely. I mean, then then you create this crazy situation where you have a person who is definitely in need. They're literally like screaming, and because the perception is like, hey, dude, that's your shit, you got to deal with that. Then you have like the other however many people in the ceremony like sending this negative energy, like, hey, shut up, man, you're like wrecking my experience. I got to deal with you. Just deal with your shit, and you're like, yo, like this person needs help. Someone needs to go over to this person, use traditional methods specifically designed for these moments, and employ them so that the person doesn't suffer any longer. And if you can't do that, then you shouldn't be running ceremonies.
There's this other phenomena that I've been noticing too, where there are people that actually end up quite messed up from ceremonies. I mean, it's hard to know whether they're messed up from the ceremony because they just dropped into like a 10-day, dieta in Peru and then left, and now they just have no integration support and they're dealing with trauma that came to the surface, or whether the facilitator that they were with just wasn't really, experienced, and, some negative entities got through. But I have a good friend who is a, therapist. She's an integration therapist, and she's like, Lorna, the state that some of these people are in when they come back, or when they, come back from the ceremony, wherever that ceremony might be, she just, shook her head, and then she has to work with trying to put them together. But it's interesting to, and of course on one level, that's what they had to go through. But on the other level, it's like the person probably has a job or maybe family, and they're not able to, go by their day-to-day life. And it could be a range of a number of different types of experiences that the person might be having to process as well, not just, psychological trauma. One of the things that, I've noticed too is people that, reach out to me saying that they're now being bothered by spirits, negative entities that followed them back from Peru. So I'm curious to know, what your thoughts are on, the, messed up after ceremony phenomena, and then, what your advice is on how to handle that, especially if you're dealing with paranormal phenomena that you may not have, expected because you didn't believe in spirits before you drank ayahuasca. And now it's like, who do you call? You the Ghostbusters, like an exorcist? Do you look for how do you look for somebody to help you out with that even?
Yeah, man, that is some complicated stuff. And, the body of plant spirit medicine is, I would call it, more expansive than our science. And our science is pretty expansive. Like our whole body of science, of scientific study, is certainly expansive. And I would say that plant medicine is more expansive. And that's really because it includes consciousness. And modern science tends to not deal with consciousness very much. And once you include consciousness, then, game over, because it becomes infinite. And so it's very, very challenging to try to talk in any general way about people that, like we're calling it, get messed up. There's clearly like a story for every single person. And that story has so many components to it, so many pieces of this puzzle that get put together that end up with a person getting messed up. And that's part of the job of a curandero, is to be able to work within that, to put the pieces of the puzzle in the places where they're supposed to go. But even a highly experienced curandero can find themselves in a place where everything lined up in a particular way, and things can happen. We had a person on our program who had done a program like 3 times already. I should mention, like, we have these educational courses. I said we have 3 centers. One of our centers does offer what I would call more like traditional ayahuasca retreats, like healing retreats. They're not for people that want to become students. They're just for people that are interested in becoming healed. And then we have a new research center that maybe we can talk about a little bit later. But this person had attended 3 retreats and was coming back. I knew him. I had known him for years. I really enjoyed his company. And he did a retreat with us and everything went fine. Afterward, he decided to stay in Iquitos. He, had become familiar by traveling to Iquitos several times. So he, just kind of bounced around a little bit, you could say. I know that he tried combo, which is now like this rage to use frog poison, and then went and drank with another curandero. At the other ceremony that he drank, he had a full psychotic breakdown, and he snapped. And then I saw him in the hotel, because they brought him out of the center and just left him in Iquitos. And, he was out of his mind. And
what did that look like, out of his mind? Just wandering around, talking aimlessly to himself, or? Well,
you could start, like, he would be like, Carlos, you got to help me. You got to help me. And then I would say, okay, let's just come over here and sit down. And I'd lost him, already I had lost him. And then he would be like, in another thought that was completely different than knowing that he was even talking to me anymore, and then I would have to try to just say hey man, it's me, Carlos, trying to get him to come back to that place where we could actually speak to each other again, or just try to get him to sit down, just trying to get him to do anything. He was just bouncing around, his thoughts were not connected, his perceptions weren't connected. He ended up getting arrested. And then the police used his credit cards to buy a plane ticket and sent him home. And maybe that was the best thing for him. I don't really know. The place that he was at did take him to a doctor that did prescribe him antipsychotic medication, but obviously he was going to have to take it. And he was in a psychotic state. So remembering to take your medication, or even knowing you had it, wasn't part of the process. Now, I followed him. We kept in contact as best we could. I spoke with his friends, who were concerned about him. And months later, he did put those pieces back together. He, of his own accord, he put all his pieces back together, and he did look at it as a tremendously profound experience, a positive experience. But of course, he didn't have a job. He couldn't keep a job or a relationship. All of his friends and family members were terribly worried about him. He ended up kind of ostracizing people because he, spoke in a way, he could speak. So you felt like he was together enough, he could say something, but then he would say something totally ridiculous, or appear to be totally disrespectful, not listening to you or not following what you were saying or anything. So all of his relationships fell apart. But that was, in an incredibly optimistic way, that was what he felt was so positive, that he was able to literally shed his entire life and then create it anew. I'm not trying to say that everybody should have psychotic breaks at all.
Yeah, I don't know. Could we get to the benefit without the mess?
Yeah.
The breakthrough without the breakdown?
The reason I tell it is because I know that curandero. He's a very talented curandero. I consider him someone that I would recommend. And I don't really know all those pieces, and no one can really know all those things that lined up for that event to happen that particular night. And maybe it would have happened at our center. It can happen. Something like that can happen. I would say that's a very, very slim risk. And when it comes to people that are serving medicine on their own, because they're not able to access that depth of healing, I would say that it's less likely for them to bring up that possibility. So my feeling is that if you are serving ayahuasca and you don't know that much about it, chances are the people that are drinking aren't going to be accessing that same level of depth that a talented curandero or an experienced curandero will be able to. And so because of that, that risk is actually going to be reduced. I hope that makes sense.
So it's less of a risk if you're drinking with a noob than if you're drinking with like an experienced, renowned shaman?
Well, it's less of a risk that you're going to go into that deepest levels where, maybe your most intense traumas are residing.
Okay.
But if those traumas come to the surface and you're with an experienced curandero, if you're crossed, if you have these troubling times, these challenging times where you're suffering, an experienced curandero will be able to take care of it. They'll be able to sort you out, to like make it so that you're good again, and where you have your thoughts together and you can control your body and you have that. So if that does happen with an inexperienced facilitator, and that can, I just think that it's probably less likely to happen because they won't be able to go to those depths. But it can happen. Anything can happen because it's so much about a personal experience. So if you are like focusing to go into those depths and you bring up these things yourself, then what's that inexperienced facilitator going to do in those times? And so I would say like that the risk of having those emergency situations is probably lower with an inexperienced curandero who won't be able to access that depth, but that risk becomes much higher in its intensity if it does occur. So yeah, you're probably not going to have an emergency situation, but if you do have an emergency situation, it could be really, really bad. Whereas you're more likely to have an emergency situation if you're bringing up these deep-seated traumas, traumas from sexual abuse when you were a child, or, traumas that you really haven't been able to deal with. You've tried so hard to suppress, and now they're coming to the surface finally so that you can be healed and take back your life. That can cause an emergency situation. That can cause a really powerful reaction, but a curandero can deal with that. And that's part of what happens, like that's part of how traumas are released, is that they have to be brought up. They have to be like dug down to wherever you were burying them, to wherever they were hidden, and bring them up to the surface so that they can be released, so that they can be cleared. And to do that, obviously, is a really troubling, challenging time. And you want to make sure that you're with people that are going to be able to take care of you.
So for people that feel like they're called to be a healer, an ayahuasca facilitator, what are some of the kinds of things they can learn if they go through your curandero initiation program? What are the practical, shaman skills?
Right. Well, a curandero becomes a curandero because of the diets. So that's what makes you a curandero, is doing diets. And so you would diet with a multitude of plants or a handful of plants. It's really about the depth of relationship with those plants rather than like the number of plants that you have. You can be friends with 100 people, but it's really like a core 5 friends that you can rely on and count on, and that you can call at any time and they'll come and support you. And that's kind of the way that it is with the friends that you make in that plant spirit world. And to make those relationships, to build and develop those friendships, is done through dieting, through plant dietas. And to do a plant dieta is not just to take a plant. In my opinion, you don't just take a plant and then follow a diet and now you're doing a dieta. It is an introduction. It does involve what's called opening the dieta. And if you have a curandero who has already built a very strong relationship with that plant, and that curandero opens your diet, essentially they are bringing that spirit right up to you, allowing you to shake hands, introducing you to this plant spirit on their behalf, letting that plant spirit know, like, hey, all of the qualities, the abilities, the wisdom and guidance that you provide me, I now want you to also provide to this person. That's what opening the diet up is doing. Yes, you can open a diet yourself, of course, and it might be good. If you go to a meeting where there's 20 people in a field that you want to get into, and you introduce yourselves to those 20 people, there's a chance that you'll build a relationship, and it'll work out well for you. If you go with someone who is already great friends with all 20 of those people, and that person walks around with you and introduces you to each of those 20 people, the likelihood of building relationships will be increased significantly. That's the idea of having a teacher introduce you to the dieta. And then how do you do a dieta properly? What are the most important aspects and the intricacies and the subtle nuances of doing a dieta that make it work to the highest level of benefit? So that's an incredibly important thing to learn, in my opinion. If you want to be a curandero, that's at the core. So that's something that we teach and that people experience. When it comes to leading the ceremonies, we provide 20 Icaros, so you get an MP3 player that has 20 Icaros in Shipibo, and you have a booklet that's over 100 pages long. A lot of it is devoted to the Shipibo language itself, so that you understand what the lyrics are, what they're translated are, what the purpose of them are, and the Icaros themselves, when to use particular Icaros to open a ceremony, to raise the mariación or the effects of the ayahuasca, to lower the effects of the ayahuasca, to level out the effects of the ayahuasca, to help to bring someone down if they're too high, or to bring them up if they're too low. All of the purposes of using particular Icaros for protection, for protecting the space, for protecting a person, calling in the spirits for particular reasons, dealing with dark energies or negative energies, and all of the aspects of purification and more subtle specifics within working with particular plant spirits. All of that is included in the course as well. So running a ceremony and serving the medicine itself, making the medicine itself, and all of the components of the core principles of running a ceremony. You actually run your own ceremony during the course as well. So the curandero sits next to you in the second half of the course, and you serve the medicine to the other students, and you open the ceremonies, and you sing the Icaros. And if someone needs help, it's your job to get to go over and help them using all of the principles. So you would obviously know how to work with tobacco and know how to work with agua florida, and using the methodologies and procedures that are part of what curanderos do to help people during the ceremonies. And your teacher's right there, so it's not like you're on your own. And then during that ceremony, he gives you a part of his dawn, basically like securing those relationships on his behalf, that those relationships now be given to you, similar to the way that a father might hand his business relationships over to his son or daughter if they take over the business or something like that. Apart from that, though, there's a lot of work done on the various categories of plant medicines outside of ceremonies, especially like the use of particular purgatories, respiratory system cleanses, central...
Can you repeat that? There was a lapse in the video, so I want to just make sure we catch what you said.
From which part?
There were particular...
outside of the ceremony?
Yeah, outside of the ceremony, exactly.
So outside of the ceremony, though, so we do try to focus a lot on what happens in the ceremony, running ceremonies, leading them from beginning to end, closing the ceremonies. But then outside of the ceremonies, we focus a lot on the treatments themselves too. So administering vapor baths, using purgatives to purify the digestive system, purifying the central nervous system, purifying the respiratory system, purifying the circulatory system, all of the different ways to use plant medicines to increase the immune system, increase the immune response to illnesses, and to create the most healthy environment for people to enact their own healing power within. It's a complete package. So you would come learning about the ceremonies, and then at the end of the course, you take on a patient who's another student. That student is also a doctor or a curandero for another student. So everyone has their own patient, and everyone is their own patient. And then you have a chance to work one-on-one with a patient to actually perform what you're learning in terms of administering plant medicines or preparing them and working with them in ceremonies as well. So we tried, again, this is just it's now an 8-week program, but we try to present an opportunity for people to really understand what it means to be a curandero and how long the path really is. And if there's one thing that most people, I think, realize is how much it's going to take. And, I think that people think, maybe some people might think oh, I'm going to do this course and then, I'll know enough to go back and open a center or run ceremonies. And then after the course, they realize I am definitely not ready to do this. And, I need a lot more work. And so we encourage people to come back whenever they want on their own, to continue to diet and to continue to practice and to keep moving forward.
Wow, this is so fascinating, and I'm so inspired now to connect with my friend who participated in this program of yours, just to hear firsthand from her what her experience is like. So I want to just raise an important question, which is that sense where a lot of people realize how much more they need to learn, and they have this reckoning as to whether or not they're truly ready. When does a person know if they're ready to lead ceremonies responsibly? Is there a particular confidence or knowledge level, or even just kind of a initiatory blessing that the curandero makes? And I raise this because from some of the tribes that I know in Brazil, for example, it takes so many years of apprenticing in the shamanic path and learning all the different kinds of plants before you're even at a level where you are considered to be ready to serve the master plant. And wanted to hear about what it's like within the Shipibo culture, and also, of course, within your educational setting.
Well, it's obviously a challenge to compare the indigenous tradition to what we're doing. I mean, of course, it's based on the indigenous tradition, and that's what we're teaching straight up. That we have Shipibo curanderos teaching their ancestral lineage. But like I mentioned, we're using the opportunities to enhance that were just not available. So even in my experience, I was using them, but if I were to not have a written language and have every day a curandero tell me something, I just got to remember it. I just have to remember it because there's no notes. I'm not going to have any memory exercises. And to go into a ceremony and just have a curandero sing 30 songs and I'm going to learn them without ever listening to them outside of a ceremony, without ever having the lyrics written down for me, without ever being able to practice them, then it's just going to take a lot longer. And for everything that I have to learn, I can't refer to anything because I don't have any way to create the reference. then I'm going to need to watch it over and over and over and over again in person. I'm going to need to see my teacher make that plant remedy and then see them do it again and see them do it again until I just have it memorized. But if I have a video of it that I can refer to and let's say, oh yeah, that's right, he did that. And then I can listen to an audio recording and say, oh yeah, that's right. That's how it goes. Or I can look at my book and say, yes, that we do that quantity with this quantity, and this is how we prepare it. Those things are going to definitely make the experience different. And that's the whole idea, to accelerate this. Like, how can we make it so that people can learn this faster? Because if it took 6 years for every curandero to be born, then the rest of the world is screwed, because they're not going to have the ability to commit that. And they're also really in need now. Like, we're way past our need to have spiritual health return to our communities and our culture as Westerners. So, to me, this is a project to like bring spirituality or really like heart health back to the cultures who have lost it. And there's a lot of us. And so when it comes to like when a person is ready to lead a ceremony, we do give our evaluations at the end of a program. And some people have been drinking ayahuasca for years before they do a course. Mm-hmm. They have, some people have done their own diets with other centers and have familiarity with the ceremonies, maybe have been an assistant. We've had people that have worked at other centers as facilitators come and receive training. So it's not like, in fact, we don't really take people who don't have experience. Mm-hmm. Because to commit to something, if you've never drank ayahuasca, don't commit to an 8-week program. That's probably, unless you totally know, and it has happened, but might be good to at least see what it's like first. And so every person's different. The last course we had in October, which was actually our last 6-week course, was the first course ever where we actually felt that all 12 students we wouldn't be worried. Like, we felt confident that all 12 of them could hold ceremonies. That being said, we still don't advise them to hold the ceremony for other people yet. We recommend that they continue to hold ceremonies for themselves, slowly introduce someone maybe who has already had experience with ayahuasca to sit with them, and very gradually like work their way up until they actually have a ceremony where someone that they don't know might be attending. But of course it's personal for every person. And, I know that a lot of people say it takes years, and that's a very, very general statement. And I agree with it in a general way. It does, but it's not a great measurement. If I say that I've been doing this for 10 years, what does that mean? Can you actually measure that? The curandero that I referenced, that I'm being generous by calling them a curandero, that person had decades of experience, supposedly. Like, they had been serving medicine for decades. And to me, I feel really generous calling them a curandero, and even though they had decades of experience. Whereas I know, like, my own facilitators, our own staff, I've had one staff member, and he's been with us for 6 years. That guy is a maestro. I mean, he is a serious, straight up maestro, and I would compare him to anyone. Like, and yeah, that's 6 years. But we have another facilitator who's been with us for 2 years, and he studied under my other facilitator, and so he had this wonderful like connection to have a student as his teacher who could easily translate and say, well, I did this wrong. It took me so long, but I figured it out this way. And that's what I did for my facilitators as well. But after 2 years, that guy is a maestro. He's a straight up maestro. And I would compare him to indigenous maestros as well. And so I don't think you can say like how long it takes. Mm-hmm. And just like, I don't know, we all know a bunch of people that play the guitar. And some people have been playing that guitar for 10 years. And no offense, but they're just still not very good at playing the guitar. And then there's some like 19-year-old kid that we know who is a freaking phenomenal guitar player. And that's why we call people gifted. We say that kid's got a gift. He's only been playing the guitar for 2 years. He blows away everybody else. That happens. And especially with healing. It's something that whether you want to say you're born with it, which I can totally understand, or all of the pieces came together in that particular way. There are certain people who literally just are healers. And without having to study anything, they are healers. And in that respect, even the self-initiated people can be very, very powerful healers. I do think that regardless of whether you are gifted, there is a tremendous benefit to having a teacher, to having proper study with a teacher. But people are all unique. And, that you have to recognize that there are certain people that are just incredibly gifted. And even when they're a teenager, you talk to them and you're like, wow, that kid is next level. That's like, that kid's going to grow up to do some incredible stuff in whatever field that it happens to be in. And that's the reality. And we shouldn't try to like negate that or hold those people back. At the same time, you have to be careful with the path that you navigate. And if you are going to have a ceremony with someone who's self-initiated, then you should hopefully like know them and get to know them at least to a point where you trust them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so to wrap up our conversation today, and I feel like I could just talk to you all afternoon, but we'll save some more conversation perhaps for another interview. I would love to just inquire about what you think the future of ayahuasca is, especially since it is clearly expanding around the globe. And then also just, kind of draw in that commentary that you made about how our culture is way past, the need, or like, the need has surpassed the availability of the curanderos and the medicine, all that. So, what can we do? Because I just had this really just, deep conversation with another medicine sister, and man, just what is happening in the world and the level of dysfunction that at the highest political levels, and the economics that are just driving the destruction of our planet. Like how do we reconcile that and our work, with the medicine? How can the medicine, heal that or resolve that potentially? And what are your thoughts on the two, the one potentially healing the other?
Wow, that's an easy question, huh?
I know. So, I don't know if I really
I got it.
Communicated that as clearly as I could have, but yeah, there's a lot there, as you can see.
Sure. First, what I see as the future of ayahuasca. Honestly, I create like an analogy to what I imagine happened with yoga. Yoga is an incredibly powerful spiritual practice, and it had a location where it was developed and mastered and brought to incredible depths, and then it was spread to the world. But unfortunately, like in that spreading, it just wasn't possible to carry the depth as it left its homeland or as it left its place of origin. And so it became watered down. It became like the surface of yoga rather than the entirety of its depth. And that's my perception of like what happened with yoga. And so if you really wanted like to experience the depth, you would still go to its place of origin, because you could still like study and learn all the way the profoundness of the practice. And that's what I see as the future of ayahuasca as well. Like you'll be able to go to a ceremony in your town, but it will be like a shallow version of this immense and profound tradition. And if you want to experience the profoundness of it, you'll still want to go to that place of origin. But what's cool about the difference maybe with the analogy with yoga is that we have a lot of really cool cutting edge practices that have been developed by the modern cultures, by people like Stanislav Grof and Robert Williams, and with epigenetics and holotropic breath work and neurolinguistic programming. And, there are these even hypnosis and really cool, beneficial practices that can work really well with ayahuasca or with other psychedelic medicines. And so I do think that will also be a part of the future. And I could easily see that there are healing treatment centers that have ayahuasca ceremonies, and they work in conjunction with psychotherapy or psychotherapeutic techniques. And, with the research being done on psychedelics seeming to have this nice revival and almost a boom, who knows what can happen. Ayahuasca could very well make its way into therapeutic practices all over the world, even if they're with specialists or in a specialized way. What I would love to see, and part of the reason why we have the research center, which I mentioned, is a better understanding of the tradition, of the methods and the rituals of the tradition, because I think that there's a lot of gems that we could learn so much from and could easily incorporate into our cultures and our lives, most specifically into our medical practices. Just a simple idea of the intention. When you get a cup of ayahuasca, before you drink it, you state your intention as a communication to ayahuasca as to what you hope to achieve in the ceremony after ingesting it. Just that, I think, could easily be studied and could be found to be really helpful. And even if you're going to take a pill that your doctor prescribes, before you take it, if you have that moment of intention and that communication and bringing the forefront of the benefit hoped to achieve by the process and the act of taking it to the forefront of your consciousness, I do think that physiologically you could be creating the optimal inner environment for healing to take place. And I think that a lot of the tradition itself is about like creating optimal inner environments to maximize the beneficial potential of the medicine. And so I would love to see more study of that. Now, what can we do to, save the world, save ourselves? What can we do for the betterment of humankind?
Can ayahuasca save the world?
Yes, definitely. Ayahuasca can save the world, and it is saving the world, in my opinion. It's not alone by any means. To me, ayahuasca is, it's referred to as kind of like the queen or the ruler or the empress of the jungle. In that way, I feel like it's like the leader of a revolutionary movement to bring plant equality back into the consciousness of human culture. We currently do not respect plants, and we consider them second-class beings on the planet, if not third-class beings. And I think that's been a real detriment to us. If we can bring plants and plant consciousness back into a more equal footing, or maybe even a higher regard than our own consciousness, like as we have been taught that we should have respect for our elders, evolutionarily, there is no one more elder than the plants, who were here billions of years before any sign of humans or other animals even. They know what they're doing. They're incredibly wise, incredibly intelligent. And, I think it's no secret to us at this point that plants are the way to save the earth. And the plants, if you cut down the forest, you're destroying the planet. If you grow a new forest, you're bringing it back. You're healing the planet. So if ayahuasca can help us to have a level of respect for plants and the spirits and consciousnesses of plants that motivates us in a real way to get back in touch with plants, to grow them, to plant them, to have our own gardens in our backyards, to know them well enough that those gardens in our backyards are not just producing our food, but also our medicines, and to have communal gardens in every city so that everyone can have access to the experience of connecting with those plants, and also to the cultivation of the plants that will feed us and to provide our medicines, that we can then get away from pharmaceutical medication and more towards natural medicine, that we can get away from processed foods and more towards natural foods, that we can begin to cultivate the relationship that we relied on as human beings with plants for millions of years, or I guess humans for 100,000 years. And then just recently in the last 100 have really broken away from. So rekindling our relationship with the plants, to me, is the secret to saving the human race and to saving the planet. And I think that ayahuasca is one of the major leaders of that revolution.
Right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time, your incredible stories, and the work that you're doing in the world. How can people best stay in touch with you, Carlos?
Well, I definitely invite you to visit our website, ayahuascafoundation.org. You can contact me through that website using the Contact Us page. I'm also on Facebook, Ayahuasca Foundation. I'm the admin of the Ayahuasca group on Facebook, which has over 75,000 members. You can contact me through that as well, and my personal Facebook page. I am on Instagram if you want to follow me at Ayahuasca Foundation as well. And yeah, if you look for me, you should be able to find me.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And you have a beautiful rest of your day. And I do hope that I can one day make it to Peru and meet you in person.
I hope so too. Good luck with everything. And thanks again for having me on the program.
Bye-bye.